All right, hello everyone. It is 12 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Before we jump into the webinar, I want to introduce the director of the Northwest ATTC, Brian Hertzler, who just has a few words for all of us today.
Thanks, Meg. I appreciate that. I'm trying to get myself situated here. So I don't want to preempt any of the important information that you guys are going to get today from Jeremy and Carson from Downtown Emergency Services Center here in Seattle. Got a great, innovative and impactful work that they do there that I'm sure they're just chomping at the bit to tell you all about. But I wanted to just take a few seconds here at the outset just to acknowledge that the Northwest ATTC in the last week was one of 2,000 SAMHSA grantees that had its funding terminated briefly and abruptly on January 13th, and then subsequently reinstated 24 hours later. So I'm speaking to you today primarily to just assure you, as folks that attend these webinars and follow our activities, that we are repositioned now with our reinstatement of funding to carry out the entirety of our planned program of training and technical assistance activities, including this webinar series. And those are underway. I think those of you that count on us for access to events that provide continuing education units and such can continue to, throughout the course of fiscal year 2026, to continue to count on us for those things. So we appreciate your continued interest and utilization of our events and resources. We'll continue to have this series. We'll continue to highlight our activities in a weekly e-newsletter that Meg distributes each Monday. And if you don't already get that, I encourage you to check out our website and get yourself on the list so you can find out about all that's coming up. And we certainly remain committed to providing that continuing education in support of the great work that you all do, providing care to persons in our region that have substance use disorders. So I'll just leave it there, maybe with a one last hope that that less chaos exists in the future path for all of us. With that, Meg, if you would like to take this show away and get on to the main event.
Great, we will do that. Thank you, Brian. So we are very excited today to have Jeremy Hoog and Carson Bell presenting for us on outreach-based long-acting injectable buprenorphine, a viable pathway to closing OUD treatment gaps. Next slide, please. All right, a couple of quick housekeeping things. So first, if you have any questions for our presenters, please type them in the chat box at any time, and we'll try to answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Next slide. Later this afternoon, you'll also be getting an email that has a link to a survey in it. Please take that survey. It helps us make sure we're bringing you the content you're interested in and helps us continue offering free or low-cost events like this one. That email will also have a link to download the slides from today and a link to our website where you'll be able to find a recording of the webinar later this week. Next slide. Right. Additionally, we'll be sending everyone who attends this live webinar a certificate of attendance in about a week. You don't need to do anything to get that certificate unless you're watching this in a group. In that case, please have someone in your group email us within one business day with the names and email addresses for everyone who wants a certificate. And our email is on the screen there, northwest@attcnetwork.org. And next slide. All right, we get started on the webinar. So I'm pleased to introduce our speakers today. We have Jeremy Hoog, who is a senior nurse manager at the Downtown Emergency Service Center in Seattle, Washington. Jeremy has been a nurse in the opioid treatment program for 4.5 years and has now moved into a senior leadership position. We also have Carson Bell, who is the project coordinator of DESC's opioid treatment network team. And Carson has been at the agency for 5 years. And with that, I will turn this over to our amazing presenters so they can take it from here.
We're unmuted. We're unmuted. Oh, right on. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about our program here at DESC. And we're also going to talk about the Orca Center today, which is what's up here now. Disclosures. We do not receive any financial reimbursement for pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, so Downtown Emergency Service Center is a pretty large organization. Our mission here is to help people with complex needs surrounding homelessness, substance use disorders, and other serious mental illness. We offer services in a variety of ways through multiple different permanent supportive housing sites located in King County. We have 3 different emergency housing shelters, our mobile crisis team, as well as mental health case management, and what we'll be talking about today, our role in helping people get access to medications for OUD. So we used to be called OTN, or the Opioid Treatment Network Team. And Jeremy and I will talk later about our post-overdose center that was recently opened, which is called the ORCA Center. And we have now been rebranded as the Patient Outreach Division for ORCA. The idea here is that we bring the services surrounding us helping those with OUD access medications like buprenorphine in various formats into their homes. So not kind of taking that out of people having to come to the clinic to see us. We travel to them to see them. And so we'll talk a little bit more about those kinds of services and what kind of medications we provide people. The team is currently small, but we've received some funding to expand, and we're excited about that. Right now, we have a nurse supervisor, a couple nurses on our team, as well as a peer support specialist, a data collection specialist, and a program coordinator. Today, we'll talk about just the setting of why we are here today and why it's important that we take the time to talk to you guys about this. We'll talk about our injectable only buprenorphine starting method that we provided in a field-based setting. We'll talk about the client experiences based off of this new starting method, and then we'll close out today with the opening of our ORCA Center, our post-overdose center. And then at the end, we will pause and take questions. So feel free to drop those in the chat as we go, and at the end, we'll look at those.
All right, so setting the stage. I'm going to talk a little bit about the opioid crisis and really how it peaked in 2023 and what really caused changes to the way that we deliver care and the changes needed to address low barrier care and how that impacted our outreach-based MOUD services. I'm going to talk a little bit about the methods we use that didn't prove to be very scalable. And then ultimately, kind of the method that we're utilizing now and the development of that method. There's a chart here that shows the last several years, but really, if you take a look at it, you can see that once we hit 2023, there were just a tremendous amount of overdose fatalities. And for us here at DESC, who at that time, I think probably 18 to 19 permanent supportive housing sites we ran, plus serving a large contingency of people that were living unsheltered or unhoused. It was something that was very front and center and very personal for us. King County recorded almost nearly 1,400 overdose fatalities in 2023. And you can see here too that really opioids were involved in almost every single one of these overdose fatalities. So this slide kind of points out that in the Seattle area, really those individuals that are living outdoors and homeless, or maybe in a vehicle, that kind of thing, they're really at a super high risk of experiencing an overdose. And during 23, when we look back at DESC's records, DESC had what we call a face page. So they just had a record of clients who had visited DESC for about 13% of King County's overdose fatalities. I think it was upwards of 255 people that year that we logged in our system that had passed away due to overdoses. So barriers to MOUD treatment. with fentanyl, the change from really this progression from heroin to fentanyl completely changed the dynamic. And for people that wanted to get started on medication for opioid use disorder, uh, all the methods that were on the box that were recommended for buprenorphine, particularly, which is where the background we were really coming from, they ended up precipitating withdrawal for people that were on fentanyl. Fentanyl is stored in the fat, lasts a long time in the body, and it really caused terrible precipitated withdrawal in people. And so that just getting started was a really a significant barrier for people that are using fentanyl. But we deal with things like missed appointments. Back in the day when we were doing just films, there's a difficulty with medication storage. And, in the past, it was recommended that you stop using your opioid for a period of time before you initiate treatment. And for people particularly using fentanyl, that was really difficult to accomplish. And in fact, most everybody we worked with couldn't accomplish that. People also have a history sometimes with buprenorphine, and they will have had a terrible experience that precipitated withdrawal. And so those failed initiations can cause a lot of trauma that lead to people not wanting to participate in the future. There's a lot of stigma within the community, not just from people like providers or people doing the work to clients, but there's also a lot of stigma within the population of substance users themselves. It isn't uncommon for people who don't feel safe when they come in to talk about their substance use to actually deny that they're using any kind of opioids. And once we establish a relationship and build some trust, those same people will often open up and talk about, what they are using when they feel safe. And, there's a lot of times too, people are using opioids or typically to self-medicate. And that could be chronic pain or it could be mental health symptoms. But opioids can be a tremendous problem solver for people, dealing with traumatic events or dealing with a difficult life or mental health symptoms or physical symptoms. So I talked a little bit about this idea of non-scalable methods. So a few years ago, the main method that we were utilizing to treat people with opioid use disorder was offering them what are sublingual films or tablets. We have both. But we had different methods. One of the methods is this kind of microdose idea, and you break up the medication into small pieces. People have to store those small pieces, and then they take them at varying times throughout the day. And over a period of several days, they escalate the dose to try to get to a therapeutic dose. Problem with that method is it's in our environment, the population we're working with, it's really difficult for people to, one, store and maintain access to their medication, and two, just to take it on schedule. For anybody that's on this call that takes a medication, the idea of taking something 4 or 5 times a day and being on top of that, it's difficult to do in the best of settings. And so this was a real failure point for us. And what this meant was that we had a really difficult time getting people started on the medication. The other issue is with these sublingual films is you can give direction on how to break it. We may provide it all cut up for individuals or all set up, but the problem is if they take too much at once, it puts them into precipitated withdrawal. And I think we'll talk about it a little bit later, but buprenorphine precipitated withdrawal is terrible. It looks absolutely awful. And once you're in it, there's not a lot of solutions except waiting for the medication to wear off, which is terrible. We also did something called a naloxone assisted quick start, which is we gave somebody naloxone and then provided them with buprenorphine. This was also not the most comfortable approach. And then we got to the Sublocade injections. And the Sublocade injections are this injection that goes in the abdomen, typically. and it releases a little depot and it dissolves over the course of the month. And so you typically only have to get it once a month. But it comes with all of the same problems that sublingual films came with, which means that if you have a bunch of fentanyl in your system and you take this medication, you are going to go into precipitated withdrawal. And so we did some of this at the request of clients that we work with. So it's what you call a direct injection. And so we would give the 300, and it did put them in precipitated withdrawal, severe precipitated withdrawal. So this was obviously not a very scalable method. And then one of the last things we tried was they make a buprenorphine transdermal patch, which required that we put a bunch of patches on your body over a period of time. And this did not work out, as most of the time we would show up and patches were missing, and it just wasn't very scalable either.
Also, insurance. It's very hard to get these patches approved by insurance, which was another large barrier. And like Jeremy said, we did do 20 direct Sublocade initiations where there was a lot of counseling done around trying to take small sublingual pieces of films prior to getting the injection. And when we would show up to these folks' homes to do this injection, you know, they would say, "Oh, I didn't do the films, but I need this injection." And I think people's willingness to try something they had never tried before really speaks to the idea of how desperate this community had been feeling in the wake of losing so many people in their life, and the methods that were available to them, like Jeremy was mentioning, with trying to get on the sublingual films, just weren't working like they used to, and were just very difficult and high barrier and hard to access. So we did do 20 different starts for people with the direct to inject. It was 19 people, one person did it twice, but of those 19 people, 18 people did continue on to receive a second monthly dose, which is, you know, really good results. We're actually writing a paper right now, kind of describing and discussing the experience that we had, but I think our main takeaways are just that from this experience, we learned there has to be a better way to help people get on this injection, and to expect someone to have to experience this level of withdrawal, you know, wasn't fair to the patient, and also, you know, was really hard for us as staff to have to witness someone be in withdrawal for so long and not be able to do anything to help them.
Like, we wouldn't recommend this.
Wouldn't recommend
Even
it.
though we had 18 continue to the second dose, we don't recommend this.
And the reason we don't recommend it, I think, is because, you know, through the work of our team and being super, you know, willing to learn from client experiences, we also had a new medical director that came on board that is an addiction med specialist who had seen studies in a Canadian ER about getting a direct injection of a smaller dose of these injectable buprenorphine medications, and they were not seeing any extreme withdrawal in the patients that were getting these lower doses of the injection. So through those studies and the work of our team, we developed a protocol using injections only to help people get onto a therapeutic dose of the medication. And the experience that we'll talk about more, but the idea here was, how can we help people get to a therapeutic dose with as minimal withdrawal as possible?
And I think it's important to note too, it's as minimal withdrawal as possible, but all of these people that we're working with are actively using fentanyl. So how can we get people started on the medication without requiring cessation of fentanyl? And that's a really tricky thing. But for us, if we could do that, we opened up all sorts of different opportunities. So what we came to was this idea. Homes we would, and I mentioned we would cut up, you know, into multiple pieces and then have somebody take that over the course of the day. The thing about films is that films will reach their peak within the hour that you take them. And so if you go too much, that's where we get that result of precipitated withdrawal. So what you're seeing here is we have this 3-day injection series. And in some ways, what it does is it mimics a microinduction, but even better because all of these injections take about 24 hours to get to their peak. And so we see a slower rise of the medication within the system, which does not cause the same kind of precipitated withdrawal. And so what we're doing is using an 8 milligram injection on day one, a 16 milligram injection on day two, and then ultimately we can get to day three and the 300 milligram or the monthly injection on day three. And this is a little bit variable. I think we have a chart coming up next. Yeah, we have a chart here. We can kind of move these days around a little bit. And honestly, a lot of this too depends on, we really try to provide individualized care. It depends on people's usage patterns, their comfort level with withdrawal. Have they been through this process before? What they know, whether they have had a really poor experience with buprenorphine in the past. We may slow roll something. Other people will come in and want to be a little bit more aggressive with their approach. But we really try to tailor the plan to them. But ultimately, it really does come down to us for most people, this 8, 16, 300 milligram injection. And I want to go back here and just for people that are curious about the dosage, you can see here that an 8 milligram injection is equal to 4 to 6 milligrams of a sublingual dose. But the thing is, again, that 8 milligrams is going to peak at 24 hours, right? So it really looks like a much smaller dose to start. And that's why we think, the injections have been such a powerful tool for us, is because of that ramping effect that happens.
Some additional counseling that we provide to people. The first few months, it can take 4 to 6 months for someone to get to what doctors call a therapeutic dose of this medication, which just means that the medication is in your system and provides relief and satiation from cravings and from withdrawal for the whole month of your injection. And in the first few months, while your body's getting adjusted to buprenorphine, some people are in need of additional medication to feel well. And in our world, we work with folks who primarily are either have been homeless recently or are homeless, experiencing severe mental health issues at times. And so, for these folks, especially who are higher utilizers of fentanyl, we're in need of more medication in the first few months. And so something that we offer is, and the guidance around Sublocade has changed, where after receiving the first monthly injection, they recommend that an additional monthly injection is given within the first 8 days after their first injection, just to boost the levels of meds in their system so that they can have better relief of cravings and of withdrawal. The medication also does, like Jeremy said, leave a depot behind, which for some of our folks with severe mental health issues or mental illness can be difficult. So just helping provide the client with an understanding that the lump is meant to be there, and it means that the medication is in your body and working. Also, some other things is insurance can sometimes be a barrier. Medicaid or some combo of Medicaid and Medicare is required for us to be able to provide this injection to folks, just because it is so expensive otherwise to do so. But as long as they have Medicaid, we're good to go. If they are dual enrolled, we can also get their insurance to approve the medication. And we recognize that this is a privilege of us living in Washington State, and this might, not be the case in every state. Here's some just very common questions that we get from patients around the injection. One of them is, will I still be able to get high? And typically what we say to that is just, buprenorphine does, keep the fentanyl from being able to work in your system the same way. So when you're on this medication, you don't get as high anymore if people continue to use fentanyl after starting the medication. And we just talk about the reasons why, being like why people search for that high and what are some other supports that we can help build into their care team to assist them with this transition from fentanyl to buprenorphine. Another one that people say often is it feels like trading one addiction for another. We've heard that all the time, even prior to doing the injection, of feeling like they become dependent on another substance. And typically, how we like to describe this is the difference between addiction and dependence. And just how we look at people who have high blood pressure and take a blood pressure medication every day. This is a opioid use disorder is a chronic health condition that can be treated with medications in the same way that you might need to take a blood pressure medication every day. We don't like looking at it as a loss of control, but rather, through this dependence on this medication, you can actually get control back in your life and be able to do those things that you weren't able to do prior to getting on the injection. Another one people say is how bad will the withdrawal be? This is where Jeremy and I will tell people that everybody's different, everyone's their own individual, and every experience is different. But typically, we find that this withdrawal through this injectable only overlapping protocol is manageable, meaning, I can still come to the clinic to be seen or be seen by somebody in the field, even though withdrawal is present. It may not, be as bad as it could be if you just went directly into that, getting that monthly shot.
And we've learned from experience, under promise, over deliver. I think early on we had a lot of hopes because we had some successful people that didn't really experience a lot of withdrawal. We failed early on and transmitted that message to a few people that had more withdrawal than they anticipated, and that wasn't great for relationship building.
No. People ask how long do I have to take this? Same thing. This is something we try to help people see this as I'm treating a chronic health condition. People ask how will I know it's working? This is when we tell people we really like going off of how people feel. So if they feel like they're in withdrawal, if they feel like they don't know, they can't tell if the medication is in their system, to come and see us, and maybe we'll be able to offer them either additional sublingual films or a booster injection to help make sure that they have that satiation from cravings and from withdrawal. Some people find in the beginning that they're using more than before. Often kind of goes back to that idea of when you're on buprenorphine, you can't feel as high anymore from using Fetty. And so sometimes people are still searching for that high that they won't be able to achieve because they're, have buprenorphine in their system. And that just requires us being really upfront with clients about what their bodies are going through and trying to see if we can incorporate other aspects of a care team to make sure they have the proper support when they're going through this really big transition. And another thing is because people have had so many negative experiences with the sublingual Suboxone films, we try to counsel people on their changing relationship with Suboxone after getting on the injection. Because once you're on the injection, you always have that medication in your system, and you can now take sublingual films as needed to alleviate cravings, and it will not make you sick like it did in the past. But as you guys might understand, that's so hard. If I take a medication, it makes me sick. It does color my experience of that medication. So it requires, really good training from staff to be able to, help parse out that conversation for our folks that bring that up. Just quick, we get our medications, for patients with active Medicaid can receive stock injections that we keep in clinic. But for folks that are dual enrolled, we use pharmacy delivered medication. And again, another privilege we recognize is working with an amazing pharmacy, Kelly Ross or Harborview Long-Term Care Pharmacy that at times we've been able to put an order in and get the medication on the same day because of how committed they are to this mission with us. And so we wanted to give them a special shout out and just to inform people of how, we typically get our medications for people. So yeah, what people are saying about starting the injection. This is like my favorite slide to talk about because I think for a long time, Jeremy and I felt, like many people in this world, pretty hopeless around the methods we had for people to get to a therapeutic dose of buprenorphine. And seeing how positive the results have been for folks, not positive in terms of they don't use fentanyl anymore, positive in the way of people feel like their lives have changed. I think every single person on our team have multiple texts from people saying this and shot has saved my life. I'm going to tell my mother, my brother, my sister, my friend, every single person that I come in contact with about being able to have space from fentanyl for the first time in a long time. People in this community have wanted help, and seeing our success with this injection has really shown and busted that myth that people don't want help. They just need to have an actual viable pathway to get there. And having that space from fentanyl, waking up and not feeling dope sick every morning is such a game changer. When I wake up and I feel sick, my whole day is ruined and I don't get the things done that I need to. And so when you are in the throes of fentanyl addiction, you wake up every morning with the worst sickness of your life. And to expect people to be able to pull themselves up out of their situation when every morning you wake up so sick is just so hard to ask. And I think that's, another reason that kind of speaks to our, the success with this is that we met people where they are in terms of, I can't stop using fentanyl right now. This is something that I do every day, many, many times a day. And what can we do to work with that person with where they're at to get them to a space where A, they're not going to die because they're going to be protected from an overdose of this injection, but two, to be able to attend to other goals and achieve other things. We've had people go to back to school, see their kids, get housing. I mean, this isn't not every single person is going to start this injection and magically everything will change, but I've worked at this agency for 6 years, and I have never seen the results that I've seen with people of just being able to do other things, not feeling as sick and feeling like they have their lives back. Why this method works, I think the big one is that we go and see people. We've lost trust in this community of being able to care for them appropriately. They've received so much stigma and mistreatment from people that represent the system like us. And to kind of rebuild that trust by coming to them. We've had several people who have said, I felt so cared about, like they actually, like you guys actually cared about me because you came to me, the feeling that they are so important that we will drive from our clinic to their tiny house, their encampment, their shelter, their housing. To see them just shows like that they are worth it. And it's really important to show people that have gone through this type of stigma that they are worth it and they do deserve good quality care. I think the other thing that I had just mentioned, but not requiring the cessation of fentanyl use. Our team doesn't, determine success by people have completely stopped using fentanyl. Our success is that people know that they can come and see us and be honest and open with us, and they will be met with a non-judgmental attitude, regardless of where they're at or what they're doing. And people don't have to stop using to start this injection. And that was a huge, huge barrier before. And it's actually recommended to maintain your use as normal during this process to treat that withdrawal, because when Jeremy's talking about the protocol, those first two small injections that people get are not enough medication on their own to keep people from feeling sick. And people have had really good health outcomes. And we know this works because people come back. People keep coming back for a second, third, fourth, fifth injection. And we've now been providing this injection for over 2 years and have had people that have been on it the entire time that are still coming back month after month to, come and see us. Anything else you'd add to that?
I think just highlighting when we talk about, I think the idea of non-judgment, right? Lack of judgment. I think in in the spaces we're in, it's talked about often. But I think, what does it look like? When we started the OTN program, we used to have, it wasn't on-demand care. We used to have appointments, and people would come in and they would do an intake. And the very first question on the intake was, why are you here? And people would say, well, I want to stop using. Everybody said that. And, partially everybody said that because they were used to coming in somewhere and having to tell somebody what they thought that person wanted to hear. They thought we wanted to hear that they were there to stop using altogether, stop using fentanyl, stop using opioids altogether. And I didn't really buy that necessarily just because of some of the behavior of some clients too. Like it was just obvious maybe we weren't at a spot where that was the priority, right? And so we talked about it and we got rid of that question and we started leading with what we can offer you. We didn't ask questions up front. When we get introduced to people and do an intake, we tell them what we can offer, that we're there to help, and that they can basically, pick from the menu and we will help guide them through any part of the process. And then later on, when you ask that question, well, what would you like to do? Often the answers are, what would you like from this treatment? I would like not to die, right? It was one of the things that was expressed often. I think really confirming the idea that, people were telling us a bit of what we wanted to hear. And I think that is one example of like true non-judgment. How do we get people to a space where they feel safe to tell the truth and they feel safe to talk about the way that they feel and think that is not going to negatively impact their care? Because I think with the best of intentions in our environment, people often, clinicians or, nurses, whatever, people often have a bit of a motive. It's like, well, we want you to do this. We want you to take the medication. We want you to stop using. And we work with really smart people. And I don't think that lands very well. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is kind of what we've really boiled down of like, what are the components that help the client have the best health outcomes, and what part of our success I think is this combination of the medication protocol. So, like we were saying, not putting the onus onto the person we're working with of having to keep track of taking the films all the time. All they have to do is be able to be found or show up to clinic to keep moving forward in their process. So, to take that off of them was a huge step in being able to, reduce that barrier and create an easier pathway for people. I think outreach similarly was so equally important. I mean, we have a story of our peer who had gone to a tiny home, and someone else the week before had gotten on the injection and was feeling so much better right away and told a bunch of people at the tiny house what was going on. And before our peer even really knew what was happening, there were 10 people lined up, some of them shirts up thinking they were ready to just get a shot right away, ready to do an intake. Our peer did 10 intakes that day, just at that tiny house alone. I think we got 25% of the tiny house village on the Sublocade injection prior to, when it shut down. But just so the word of mouth that has happened with this injection has really surprised and been kind of what's part of the magic of this and how beautiful it is we weren't even going out to try to tell people about the injection. That was all done for us by people who had gotten on the injection and texted their mother, I'm not their brother, their sister. I mean, we have whole families coming in here to get on the injection because they know that it works and they didn't have that before. And you see, as soon as something like changes and there's a different type of pathway that's more accessible, the word spreads like wildfire. I mean, me and a nurse of ours would go to a place and we would see our business card on this car dashboard that this person we don't know, because people are just so excited and want each other to be well. This community has experienced so much trauma and so much grief. They've lost so many people. You really see how committed they are to keeping the rest of them, and trying to like do something different. And I think our staff, just the idea that we're mentioning of providing this non-judgmental care, it's amazing what happens when you open that up of saying we don't care whether you want to stop using or not. When people do stop using, at times it comes after being able to be open and honest of, well, I just don't want to die. I'll start the injection. And over time, they see maybe that is actually a possibility for them. A lot of people felt trapped with fentanyl and thinking, I'll never be able to stop using this. And when you offer people a different way, when you give them some space from fentanyl, it's amazing what happens in terms of people's goals change when they see that something is possible and accessible for them. This is just some numbers. So the where it's highlighted in red there in 2024 is when we introduced and started with more systematic use, doing our overlapping the injectable only protocol. And as you can see, the enrollments just skyrocketed from there. I used to be going out begging people to come and try films, please, please, like walking around like someone talk to me. And I mean, we had just people coming into the clinic all day long. I mean, it just exploded. We had so many people who wanted to start the injection. And it's really just so beautiful to see this community care about each other the way they do. And it's just so very clearly evident. This is just in our active enrollees, how much things changed after implementing this protocol for people.
This is self-advocating, right? I mean, like Carson's saying, going out there and kind of like, you got something that could help somebody. But this was wild because it was word of mouth, like Carson's saying. But we've talked so much about this idea that people are just self-advocating, and the perspective that that gives us, because other people, that are not in the work can often, talk about this population and criticize it, and they don't want help and they don't want this. And we have seen quite the opposite when you give people something that actually works.
We ended up publishing a paper about our protocol in JAMA Open Network end of last year that you could view at your leisure. We were pretty proud of this. We were maybe not expecting to be accepted by JAMA Open Network, but I think it just really shows too how essential the being creative in this field is, because when you look at traditional research and most recent research around buprenorphine, the treatment retention rates are so low. Jeremy's our numbers guy, but they're low. They're less than like 30%. They're less than
Oh, we're like
20%,
18.
18%.
We were like 12.
And after we started implementing this different protocol, our retention rates just skyrocketed. Like more than 2/3 of people who started on this injection series came back for a second monthly injection, which in the world of opioid treatment is just, I mean, that number just doesn't exist. And we were just floored by how well this was working for people.
Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about our Orca Center, opioid care, no, opioid recovery care access. I love acronyms. We are the king of acronyms, king and queen of acronyms at DESC. Yeah, so now our Orca Center opened in September of last year. It's a 24/7 facility, and really two main populations. We are there. We have 8 recliners. We have nursing and providers on staff, peers, and we can provide a safe space for people that have had just experienced an overdose event. And so instead of going to the hospital, we're essentially a diversion to that for people that agree to come to the Orca Center. And they can come there, and if they want to start on MOUD, they can do that. If they just want to gather information, they can do that. If they just want to get nursed back into feeling better after that overdose event, they can do that too. And hopefully in the process, they they engage with our staff and feel comfortable and safe, so they know where they can go to get whatever it is, they need, whether it's MOUD or, just some guidance. But so that happens 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the other thing that happens is we are now this access point for MOUD 7 days a week, 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. at night. So people can come in, they can start MOUD during that period, including methadone. We can start people on methadone under the 72-hour rule. So we can provide over the course of 3 days, we can provide them with methadone. And then we actually have ETS, Evergreen Treatment Services, on site at DESC down the hall from us, Monday through Friday, that we can connect them with to get them enrolled into the methadone program. So that's an option. They can get injections, films, support medications for things like nausea, maybe something to help them sleep a little bit. All of those things are accessible at the Orca Center, 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. at night. And yeah, and so it's been a really amazing uh, project and process because we have just gone from a 9 to 5 operation Monday through Friday to being able to just offer all sorts of kind of MD services 7 days a week. And it's been really cool.
At 4 o'clock, we used to call it OTN happy hour, where we'd have a steady flow of people throughout the day, but at 4 o'clock it would be like everybody's showing up because we closed at 5. And for a lot of our folks, to close at 5, that's kind of almost at the beginning of someone's day. So to be able to extend those drop-in hours to a later time to be more accessible to people was really important to us as a value of providing as low barrier access as possible. And clinic times, of the daytime just don't aren't conducive to every type of lifestyle. And so it's been really helpful to have those extended hours for people. And then this is just one of our flyers that kind of explains, a little bit of what Jeremy's talking about, and our connection with our Health 99 team, who are part of the fire department that are dispatched out to overdoses in the community, where buprenorphine can actually be started in the field. And that's something that's been, spreading through different emergency response systems throughout the country, but especially here in Seattle now, pretty common that when someone does have an overdose in the field, they if they're willing and consenting, can start buprenorphine right away, which makes this transition onto, if they would so want, the injection even easier when they come into the Orca Center. This is just some numbers of the number of people that we've served since opening, and this is a little outdated. This is from September. We had 45 different initiations just in that month alone, of people coming in to see us at those extended walk-in hours, and 70 post-overdose that month as well. That was all of our slides, so we wanted to open it up for questions. And Meg, if you
Yeah.
would be so helpful in helping us know what the questions are, because I can't see them.
No problem. Thank you so much. That was really interesting. So please type your questions in the chat, and we have one already, and that question is, would you consider this a potential option in an incarcerated setting that has access to work in the community while incarcerated, or in community reentry centers?
I think we missed the beginning of of that
sorry.
question.
The question was, would you consider this, I'm assuming they mean injectable buprenorphine, a potential option in an incarcerated setting that has access to work in the community while incarcerated?
Great question. For many of us, we know that leaving jail, leaving hospital, leaving treatment are our scariest times, and with the highest risk of experiencing an overdose for our folks, typically because their tolerance has dropped significantly. They've been taken out of their community, and when they return back to their community is when we are the most worried, because that risk is so much higher of experiencing an overdose. And we have been, attempting to create relationships with the jails that our clients are in and out of, because if people could get started on Sublocade while they're incarcerated, A, they leave with overdose protection for at least a month. B, they already have to go through withdrawal because they are in jail. And to be able to transition them and provide them relief of cravings and of that withdrawal to get started on this medication would be huge. And I think part of what's so beautiful about the outcomes of stabilization on buprenorphine is the lack of returning to jail, not going to the hospital. If I want to put on my insurance capitalism hat, getting people started and keeping them on buprenorphine is going to save me a ton of money because they're not going to jail because they're stealing for to get access to just be well and not be so sick, or they're not going to the hospital because of an overdose event. So the savings that can occur socially from people getting started and being retained on treatment is huge. And it would be amazing if jails could offer this medication to people while they're there. Even just at the very basis of, I don't want my person to leave jail and die that very same day, because their tolerance was so low. Would you add anything?
I just want to kind of reiterate. I think we use this idea of like one of the benefits of the medication all the time is overdose protection. I don't want to undersell that because we've established several hundred people have reached a therapeutic level of medication with us. And knock on wood, but not a single one of those people that have reached a therapeutic dose have had an overdose event. And to us, that is, I mean, into them, I mean, it's such a huge win, especially when we go back to the beginning of the presentation where we talked about in 2023, right? We recorded 255 fatal overdoses. So the overdose protection is phenomenal. And so, yeah, to your point about leaving institutions, that's why this is so important.
Wow, interesting. Thank you. Next question. How soon after a suspected overdose can a person be referred to ORCA, and are there geographic limitations to who can be referred?
Yeah, not really. I mean, the geographic, will start there. Limitations would be, can you get to ORCA? Typically, we're serving King County, but there's no hard and fast rule on that. So if for somebody that has an overdose event, oftentimes what happens in the community, they will be, Health 99 will follow the fire department response and actually bring that person after that event right to the ORCA center. So it can be right away. And in fact, the sooner the better, because that gives us more options as far as how we would provide medication and the choices that we would make. The sooner somebody gets there, the more options we have. It's a bit complicated sometimes, but that's just the fact of that. And then if somebody, has an event and they don't get there right away, they can absolutely come in at any point to make a plan to start medication if that's what their goals are.
Great. Great. Next question. How many of your clients are on the injectable versus the films versus methadone? And is the injectable version
I think
100% covered by Medicaid?
in Washington State, the injection is 100% covered by Medicaid. I can't speak for other states. And when people are also dual enrolled, sometimes it requires us to submit a prior authorization to get approval. But most Medicare/Medicaid plans do fully cover, when it's in combo, do fully cover the injection. As far as like the number of people who are on films versus the injection, I think it would be misleading to just give you the numbers, because I find that there are tons of people who still get films from us who just haven't had the opportunity to talk to us, because we there's so many people that at the very minimum that live in DESC housing among our 23 different housing sites that we have. Some people we just have not had access to talking to. So that's what leads us to kind of thinking about de-siloing our work and bolstering our staff and their training so that everyone feels comfortable talking to somebody around their substance use. And there are still people that like the films and wanted to keep doing the films, that, to them, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And we do have also some people who are maybe afraid of the injection, or live very far away and can't come into clinic once a month to get an injection, that are on films. But I would argue that also a lot of people that are on films are not getting the same therapeutic benefit that they can get from the injection, because it's so hard. I mean, once you I skip my meds all the time, and once with buprenorphine, you can't really just do that. If once if you don't take your buprenorphine film for a few days, you're kind of starting back at square zero if you're continuing to use fentanyl because you've lost all of that protection in your body, all that buprenorphine's out of your system, and you kind of have to start from square one. So I don't necessarily think people get the same therapeutic benefit. And for some, it can work so well. We just the population that is incredibly vulnerable, either experiencing homelessness or had previously experienced homelessness, and many have severe mental health illnesses. So we're also working with a very different subset of the general population. But I do think a lot of these things are generalizable to just to everybody who's seeking and using MOUD.
How long does a person have to wait to go from methadone to the injectable buprenorphine?
We can get pretty creative with that. We've done that a few times, actually a number of times now. So there's more of a crossover with the utilization of both medications to make that happen. Something I do want to say in regards to that of, if you have a client and that's discussed, I always want to ask why that's happening. If somebody's stable on methadone, I don't think switching is necessarily always the best choice. And we've talked to several people out of making that transition just for reference because they were having success with methadone. And the two medications are different. You're going to feel a little bit different on both, but there is creative ways to do kind of this crossover with those medications.
Are there any limitations for pregnant women with the injectable?
No, not at this point. I think the only thing we have done is when we have done that, which has been just a couple cases, is really, really being cautious to slowly move into the process so that we are not instigating precipitated withdrawal and doing our best to avoid that.
Great.
But both Sublocade and Suboxone are totally safe for pregnant women to take. It used to be that pregnant women needed Subutex only, but Suboxone and Sublocade are both very safe for pregnant women.
Yeah.
Interesting. I have a question myself, which is when someone's taking the injectable and they have to get it once a month, what happens if they can't get in at the right once a month time, or if they miss an injection by a week? Are there bad effects for that? So it's like critical to get there exactly 28 days.
That's a great question. And this is why Sublocade is so beautiful because it has an incredibly long tail when you compare it to film. So, when people, and that's what doctors call this a long tail, but what that really means is it just takes a long time for it to actually leave the body. So even at the 30-day mark after getting an injection, the injection is slowly tailing off. So even at day 30, you're still at significant overdose protection, which does start to go down gradually each day. But there's not this fast drop off like there are with some other types of medications like Vitrol. And in the first few months, the timing is more important because in those first few months when someone's not yet at a therapeutic dose, and they might need more medications, the medication wears off more quickly. That timing is important. But after someone reaches that therapeutic dose around the 4 to 6 month mark, they could miss a whole month and
Oh,
come back in
wow.
and get their next
Up
injection
to
and
two
yeah,
once
Wow.
somebody's been therapeutic.
and
Yes.
not have withdrawal symptoms. So it's very nice for us because sometimes we lose track of people for a while and we're
Yeah.
like, "Oh, nice, you're here." And after some counseling and some talking about their situation, we realize, "Oh, you can totally get this next injection and you're fine. You've had 9. Like you're going to be fentanyl
Yeah.
because of how long that tail is for people and how that steady state when you get to that therapeutic dose, how long it takes for you to significantly drop off after."
Wow, amazing. Thank you. Next question, which has worse long-term effects, the injectable buprenorphine or methadone? And I'm not sure what they mean necessarily by long-term effects, but maybe you do.
I'll speak from like client experience. Like there are some like clients who talk about like be long-term being on the film. Sometimes it can mimic substance use, right? Because you're taking, you're dosing yourself multiple times a day. So just the idea of having to dose every day or taking a medication every day can mimic and be a negative experience that reminds them of using fentanyl. But some people report issues like with their teeth, and I think, that's something that we try to counsel people, like rinse your mouth out after, but we're so not certain that it's the Suboxone that's causing the issue with people's teeth, and more of like when you are in active use, you are less likely to pay attention to your dental. I mean, I barely pay attention to my dental hygiene, and I think I have it all working in here. So like it can be tough to do that. And I think even just leaving anything on your teeth can erode your enamel. And so some people talk about that. Some people talk about being constipated. On any type of opioid can make you more constipated, whether it's fentanyl or, the injection or methadone. So, but there's obviously medications and things that we can do to help assist people. And that's what's so cool is I can't really think of any other like long-term negative effects that come from being on MOUD. And I think that's what's so cool about it is that there are not these huge like negative side effects that happen from being on this medication. And we recommend that people stay on it for as long as they want, maybe for the rest of their lives. Really want to challenge the idea that, this is a chronic health condition, and someone wouldn't say, "Oh, well, you can stop taking your blood pressure medication. You should start tapering down on your blood pressure medication." Like no one does that. We want you to take your blood pressure medication till the day you die, and maybe we feel the same way about MOUD.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We're at 1 o'clock, so I'm going to let you guys go. Thank you so much. This was a really interesting presentation. I learned a lot and just so grateful to get the perspective from your actual clients with their questions and their experiences. It's amazing. All right, we will send out an email to everyone later today with the recording and the slides and information about our next webinar, which is also about buprenorphine and fentanyl. So stay tuned for more. And thanks so much for coming today, everybody. Bye-bye. See you later.
Thanks for having us. Bye.